I'm not going to nail you guys down since you haven't had time to think about the greatest Buckeye football player of all time, but who should be
Orlando
on the
Pace.
short list?
Mine is Orlando Pace. I will also, I think if you have like a Mount Rushmore, you've got Orlando Pace, Archie Griffin. If we're just talking players, I guess Chick Harley probably belongs on there. And then I don't know who the third is that you would want to put up there, and you guys can talk about that. But for me, the best college football player I've ever seen is Orlando Pace, and I know he didn't have any Heismans. He should have had one. Archie is Archie, but for me, I'm going Orlando Pace.
Yeah, I think those are good ones.
How many players have gotten 100? I mean, I know it wasn't 100,000 seats at the time, but Chick Harley, I mean, it's the horseshoes, the house that Harley built. I mean, I never saw him play. You know, I just think in terms of contributions and being a groundbreaker. I mean, where does Bill Willis go in the conversation there? But I didn't get to watch him play. So there are a lot of names out there that, you know, I've watched, you know, cut-ups and read about or whatever. But I agree with Tony that really the most dominating player that I have seen at his position, who was, you know, we can talk about, like, to use a baseball stat of WAR, wins above replacement. I mean, Orlando Pace would be the dude.
Eddie George was up there, I think. Chris Spielman, you know, is a folk hero and production-wise, I think would be up there on a lot of people's lists. You know, there's a lot of guys. I mean, you could, you know, flash it forward. I mean, I don't know, these national championship teams that they've had here in our time. I don't know if there was anybody on the 02 team who'd be on the Mount Rushmore. You know, is Joey Bosa one of, if not the greatest defensive lineman they've ever had? I don't know. So, you know.
I think Chase Young is maybe the best defensive player I've ever seen at Ohio State, the most dominating defensive player. In 2019, he was amazing. Yeah. But I do like the Chris Spielman thing, because you're right. The production is there. They're back in the 80s and even into the 90s. Like, Chris Spielman was a legend, a current legend, and then a legend even after his playing days. And shoot, I mean, he got an interview for the head coaching job at Ohio State, having never coached. You know, like, he got to have a sit down with Andy Geiger to talk about the open position after John Cooper was fired. But I wouldn't have a problem at all putting that fourth guy as Chris Spielman. I think a lot of people just go ahead and put Woody there because the other three are easier. So it's like, you got to have Woody on there. But if you're just doing four players, it becomes a lot more difficult.
And then you also have positions where if you're shown the respect, you don't have any action coming at you, like a Sean Springs. I mean, what happens there? Well, you know, in his final season, I don't really remember a lot of plays going his way, but, you know, I mean, that was, you know, that's something there too. I mean, in terms of maybe just impactfulness to their season, I mean, Chris Gamble, I mean, just was an incredible Iron Man. I mean, with what he was able to do playing both ways, I mean, out there 110 out of 120 plays, I mean, doing everything. I mean, was he Orlando? Was he, some of these other guys? No. But again, I think it's a case of what your criteria is. And I think we could ask 100 people, and 100 people are going to have different criteria. Even if you sit there and you try to put everybody in a box and say, this is what we're looking at. We're all going to have different views. And again, that's why we can sit here and probably do 5 shows on this, because there's just so much Buckeye history to go through.
Ohio State's got plenty of guys in the College Football Hall of Fame, and there are 2 of them on the ballot this year. The letter came out this week. James Laurinaitis, who's now on the support staff at Ohio State, was an All-American at least twice, maybe 3 times. I think maybe 3 times in the mid-2000s. So he won maybe the Nagurski or one of the awards. He won one of those in his sophomore junior year. And then Chris Ward, who has probably been on this ballot for a good long time, he was an All-American offensive lineman kind of in the last year or 2 that Woody Hayes was the coach, like 77. In that range, he was probably the best player on those teams, in the late 70s. I mean, Woody lost his last 3 games to Michigan, 76, 77, and 78. And, was gone, obviously after he punched the Clemson player. But Chris Ward, he's been kind of forgotten over time how good of an offensive lineman he was for those late 70s Ohio State teams. And I'm not sure, if he's going to get voted in or not. But, there are any number of Ohio State players in the Hall of Fame now. And, there's just as part of this wide-ranging discussion, just kind of bring up those guys that are on the ballot for this year. They never like to take more than one guy from a school in any one given year. And usually they don't take guys from a school in back-to-back years, I don't think either. So they try and spread it out as best as they can. So we'll see if either of them survive the cut this year and can get into the Hall of Fame. I guess we'd find that out maybe later this summer.
Should we spread it out, or should we reward the players that earned it?
Well, there's a lot of politics in there in terms of how that is. And Steve hit the point that I wanted to make, that no school can put a guy in back-to-back years. And so it's kind of, who off the list is actually eligible that year. So, I mean, if you end up on it and you're in the, Ohio State gets it in the odd years and you're on the even year, I mean, you're just, a hat on the table, so to speak, because just the unwritten rules are that you're not going to get in. And that's kind of a problem that I've had with a lot of Hall of Fame setups, is if they have a lot of these hoops that you have to jump through. I think that we should be rewarding the players on merit and not on some circumstance and things like that.
Yeah. I would like college football Hall of Fame guys to be more than just guys who were spectacular in one season. I would think that to be in the College Football Hall of Fame, you should have a minimum of 2 years where you are at or near the top guys at your position across all of college football. And I know that I think they have a rule that you have to have been a first-team All-American at some point in your career to get into the College Football Hall of Fame. And I'm not sure that that's entirely appropriate either, but because I don't know. The old John Havlicek, Jerry Lucas rule.
Give it to us, Tony. Zeke Elliott. He's a Hall of Famer.
Well, he won the freaking Sullivan Award as the top amateur athlete in America. I mean, give me a break.
Your inclusion into the Hall of Fame shouldn't be dependent on the fact that there are 2 other guys that were also had a great year that year, and that's what the situation is for a running back, or one other guy had a great year, like a quarterback. Like, none of these Ohio State quarterbacks under Ryan Day are eligible because they were never first team All-Americans. And yet, your Heisman finalists, you're putting up records. And so, the Zeke Elliott thing is one that always bothers me about this, when, somebody like, BJ Sander is eligible, but Ezekiel Elliott isn't. And, no disrespect to BJ Sander. I believe he was an All-American. He won the Ray Guy Award, I believe. But, like, I think it's okay to you don't have to be so stringent with the rules. And really, like, not allowing more than one person every 2 years or whatever, that's quite an assumption that there won't be multiple guys, like a guy every single year from Georgia or Alabama, Clemson, where, they've got this lineage of players that are still going to be eligible. And, like, Chase Young should be a College Football Hall of Famer. And, there some of these recruiting classes that are going on now, and the way things are so specialized, there are some programs that probably have a guy every year that could go in for the next 20 years. But now you're saying those guys can't go in for the next 40. Well, what happens in the 40 years between now and when those 20 guys have finally been inducted? I think it creates some problems for sure.
The politics of the whole thing kind of got me. It was maybe 10, 15 years ago. Pat Fitzgerald, who played in the mid-90s at Northwestern and was very involved once he got into coaching with the National Football Foundation Chicago chapter, going to their meetings and, doing whatever, being, a supporter of the foundation, which helps pick the Hall of Famers. He goes into the Hall of Fame before Chris Spielman, who played at Ohio State a decade earlier than him. I believe that was the chronology of how that came down. And that made absolutely no sense to me. So, because first of all, Chris Spielman Pat Fitzgerald, God bless him, was a very good player. And yeah, they had the breakthrough season and they went to the Rose Bowl with Gary Barnett as the coach and all that. But man, Chris Spielman was twice the player Pat Fitzgerald ever thought he was. So yeah, let's don't get it twisted, as the kids would say.
Yeah, I'll throw in really quick. They need to have like a veterans committee, like in baseball, for the Baseball Hall of Fame, and work on like getting the backlog of players
like Chris Ford.
Yes, yeah. So you don't have. I mean, because they're going to be guys that are absolutely worthy, absolutely should be in, who are going to get caught up by the fact that you're bringing younger guys into the conversation, and the voters aren't necessarily up to speed with some of these, guys that would be eligible maybe for like a veterans committee or whatever. I think that would be the way, or you need to have a year where you're like, hey, we're gonna, this is a make good year, and we're going to sit there and we're gonna put 4x what we normally do, because we are deficient in what we have in our enshrined at this point. But who knows? I mean, and certainly we got to talk to some people at College Football Hall of Fame when we were down for the Peach Bowl, and they're all wonderful people. But I think that they need to make some changes.
Definitely worth visiting if you're in Atlanta. Really enjoyed our day we got to spend there for the media day, talking to both teams, and definitely worth a side trip if you're in Atlanta for a game, or even just visiting, to go downtown and see that.
Rules seem to be the way to go when you're raising children, but when you're voting on Hall of Fame credentials, guidelines. Yes, I'm a big believer in guidelines, not rule. 60%. This coach at 60.1% is automatically a better coach and qualified for the Hall of Fame, as opposed to all these various conditions and circumstances involving a Howard Schnellenberger with a 59% winning percentage. Ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, you have Howard Schnellenberger, who won a national championship at Miami, made Louisville relevant in football, and started Florida Atlantic out of whole cloth, or whichever school that was down there.
Yeah, that's going to hurt your winning percentage.
I mean, that guy, if there's nobody that should be in the Hall of Fame, that guy ought to be in the Hall of Fame, just as a contributor to the sport and also a winner. I mean, but his overall winning percentage, because he coached for a few years, we had some losing teams, it drove down his percentage, and he's not eligible. Well, I don't find that to be truthful, a good reason.
Yeah. I do think the one thing that we can all agree on is that Ryan Sandberg is the greatest second baseman in National League history.
Better than Ron Oster?
Ron Oster. Yes.
Did Ernie Banks play short or second? Where did he?
Short.
He played short.
Moved to first base late in his career. Very late.
Play two.
Yeah, short.
We don't do enough of anymore, boys, is play two. No? But again, the bad thing about playing two is you have more off days, and the worst thing in the world is when my team doesn't have a game on a given day. So because you sit around mope all day, you have no game to look forward to. Like, for instance, tonight I am looking forward to game 2 of the Ellie De La Cruz era at Cincinnati. And not to belabor the point, but I had a ticket to go to see the Columbus Clippers last night against the Louisville Bats, thinking that Ellie De La Cruz was going to be there playing with the Bats. And 6 hours before the game, the Reds pulled him up, and instead they put him in the cleanup spot against the Dodgers last night. And in the first inning of the game, it was Stevenson hit a base hit, and De La Cruz was on second base, and they went to the dugout shot, and the guy who was on third base was jogging home, and here's Ellie De La Cruz, the phenom, coming around third, almost lapping the guy who was on third base. And at that point, I just started cackling, laughing, like, it's fun to be a Reds fan again. Here we go. And, looking forward to that tonight. More of the same. And within a year or two, I think this is going to be kind of like a Kansas City Royals situation, where you just build it out of minor leaguers, and all of a sudden you've got a team that can win a pennant, maybe, with the Reds. So we'll see how it goes.
I thought you were going to liken it to the Royals.
You can look great in pinstripes when all of them are Yankees.
I was going to say the Cubs and the Dodgers.
There's a writer for the Inquirer who's all pissed off because the closer for the Reds, Diaz, I think it's his brother was the one with the Mets who blew his arm out or whatever, got injured in the World Baseball Classic. Maybe it was his arm. I don't know. Maybe it was his knee.
A leg. Jumping up and down.
Yes, he got injured celebrating in the World Baseball Classic. So people in New York are like demanding that the Reds trade the other brother to New York so he can be on a contender. And one of the Cincinnati writers took complete umbrage to that. Like, these people act like there's only two baseball teams, the Mets and the Yankees, and all the good players need to be on. We saw it with Aroldis Chapman. The Reds, took him as far as they could, and then, off to New York to make $26 million a year. So, what can you do?
When you guys get on a roll, I have a backlog of about 18 things I wanted to address. But so Ron Oster, yes, that was an ironic comment you actually made, Steve, because of course he is the guy that replaced the legitimate argument against
Joe Morgan.
But Joe Morgan.
Willie Morgan. Ron Oster played 15 years for the Reds, and the only at bat he ever had that mattered, I think he pinch hit in the 1990 World Series and got a hit. That's the only at bat that man ever had that meant anything in 15 seasons. He got a hit when we needed him the most. He was there for us. So
the Billy Hatcher World Series.
Billy Hatcher World Series. Yes.
All right. I'd love to talk baseball for the next 5 hours or so, but we'll get back to it. It sounds like this new player rivals the speed of the guy you had playing center field, about 10 years ago? Hamilton?
Yeah, Billy Hamilton.
Hamilton.
Different size, and Hamilton was a shorter guy. This guy's 6'5", and he's an infielder. He's got a cannon. I guess they said in the minor leagues he threw a ball from shortstop 102 miles per hour over to first base. They had him at third base last night. I think he can scale tall buildings in a single bound. I don't think there's anything this guy can't do. They managed the velocity of the ball coming off the bat. He hit a ball for Louisville this year, and I don't know the exact, maybe 112 miles per hour, the exit velocity. It is the single hardest hit ball by anybody in professional baseball this season. And last night he hit a double up the gap, which is the single hardest hit ball by anybody on the Reds so far this season. It was the first time he put a ball into fair territory. So we're looking for more of that, maybe 3 times tonight. That'd be great.
Well, what he can't do is on his very first defensive play, he got handcuffed by a shot down the line, and he wasn't able to come up clean with it. And
yeah, tough play.
All right, I'm ready to talk football because the Dodgers bullpen pooped the bed last night, and they walked a guy who was hitting 172. I mean, Christ, throw a beach ball up there for Pete's sake.
I'll give you one of these last two, Kev, just to say I'm being sporting. You can have one of the last 2 games. That's what you can have.
Oh, you're a real prince.
Yeah.
Going way back, my point on Orlando Pace, that was 3 hours ago. While the argument for these players being great college players needs to stay with their college accomplishments, of course, a lot of people get it mixed up and they either taint their careers based on their bust status at the NFL level, not bust as in Hall of Fame, but boomer bust status, or otherwise. The great thing about Orlando Pace is still separating the college and the pro career because there aren't statistics for an offensive lineman. He basically validated, in a sense, to say, this is what we did see in college, is he was able to do this to grown men for 15 years in the NFL to the point where he was a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yep. Won a Super Bowl with the Rams, no doubt. Yep.
And would hold out every mini camp because he didn't need it.